All right, guys. So I am super, super excited to introduce Miss Aisha Taitano, and she is one of my favorite leaders, believe it or not. Um, and the topic today, I just want to throw something out there real quick. We come here to learn about Agile. We learn about Agile transformations, and so what happens when a company goes Agile and they've reached a certain level of maturity? What else is there? Right? What else is there? Guess what? Alicia today is going to talk about the next level of maturity for an organization that's already doing Agile. And now they're doing design thinking, and now they're doing lean startup, and how everything kind of comes together. But that's just a little preview because she's going to give you more details. But she is head of innovation at TrackPhone. We've had a pleasure of working with her for the last couple of years, and you're one of my favorite people, believe it or not, one of my favorite leaders. So I want to throw that out
Oh,
there. So thank you so much for joining
Rich,
us. There
you
you go.
didn't
I
have to
made you
butter me
cry.
up. I'm here. I'm here, man. I'm here. Well,
All
thank
right.
you for
Thank you.
having me, Rick and Regina. I super appreciate the offer to come and chat with you guys. I think y'all know because you see me every day that I am super passionate about this topic, and I love that we are getting together in kind of like this informal format to talk about it. I'm a pretty informal person, honestly. So I can do the big deal. I can get up on the stage in front of a bunch of people and speak, but I much prefer this. I much prefer kind of casual conversation amongst friends where we get to explore topics and talk and ask questions and really kind of dig in. So I am going to ask Marcella to man the chat. That's a great place to add questions. I will keep my eyeballs to it. I am going to share my screen in one moment. And then we are going to start off with some interaction to hopefully let me just kind of level set with you guys on exactly what you do and don't notice or do and don't know about our topics. One brief call out, and Rick and Regina and Chuck and Andreas all know this. I live on a sailboat and I have a parrot. Homeboy is right here. So if you hear somebody screaming in the background, it's not a grown man yelling at me. It's my parrot, and he just sometimes likes to add into our conversation. We'll see how he does tonight, but he occasionally will serenade you or yell. I apologize. He's usually pretty minimal if I just kind of keep the talk track going. So just FYI. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you guys should see a very colorful presentation in front of you called Lean UX. And really what I wanted to talk to you guys talk to you about tonight is how design thinking, lean startup, and agile can work together to generally just like level up your game, right? So really create amazing results for customers and end users. So a little bit about me. My name is Aisha Taitana, as you guys know, head of innovation at TrackPhone. Worked for a bunch of different companies along the way, a bunch of different industries, mostly in product management and innovation. I've worked for Waste Management, Travelers, Cisco, LPL, most recently at TrackPhone. And I am very, very passionate about helping people change their perspectives and change the way they look at problems and solutions and behavior and patterns so that they can design things that feel really, really great to use and interact with. A little bit about me personally is I live on a sailboat. You guys already got that, the Aisha Marie. I love all the things that have to do with the water. Most recently, I am learning about free diving. So just beginning my journey there. I'm a mom. I've got three daughters in their early 20s. I love motorcycles. Recently switched from a kind of a more standard bike to a sports bike. So that's been really great. And I am like, I call myself like the proto cosplayer. Like I liked cosplay before cosplay was a thing. I'm older than I look. So back in my day, you were just weirdos who dressed up. And I continue to be a weirdo who dresses up. I think now, like I said, it's got some legitimacy because we put a term to it. But I make no quibbles about just saying, now I'm just a nerd who likes to play dress up. So that's a little bit about me as a human. more than me as a professional. Let's start off with a little bit of interaction. I want you to go to your phone. It works on your computer too, but it works better on your phone. Go to menti.com, put in this code that you're seeing right here, or go and put in the, you can take a picture of this little QWERTY code too, and it should bring you to the right place. And then I hopefully am going to get the sharing right. Okay, switch between. You guys should now see says Menti on one side and the QR code on the other. All right. So looking at my chat here, I'll give you guys a second to get yourself all set up here. Everybody got it? Anybody got a problem?
Got it.
Cool. All right, so let's do, you're all about it already. Let's do our first question. How much do you guys know about each discipline? And this kind of updates in real time. Oh, I'm excited to see so many people know about design thinking. That's awesome. I assumed you guys would be pretty good in the Agile space in general. So Lean Startup sounds like it's maybe the one where we have about the same, design thinking, Lean Startup. Okay. That's probably the one that's kind of the same amount of information there. Cool. Excellent. All right. Well, I built a nice dynamic presentation today. So I wasn't sure how much you guys would know about design thinking and Lean Startup. So I think from what I'm hearing or seeing kind of in our Menti, that I'll give you guys, as part of what we're doing, a brief overview of design thinking and Lean Startup, because we're going to talk a little bit about how all three of these things fit together. And obviously, if you're not aware of what one of those two concepts are, you'll miss out on kind of how they fit together. So we'll do, based on your guys' response, we'll do just kind of a quick overview of each. All right, let's go to our next question. If I know how to go to the next question. All right, so let's talk about what we know. What do we believe about design thinking, Lean Startup, and Agile? You now should get your next set of questions. Is it prompting the next questions for you guys?
Yes, it did.
Oh, there we go.
Yes, it did.
Awesome. There we go. Great. Sometimes it's a little slow. Andres just went through this training yesterday and today, so he's like, "Oh, this is probably a little repeat for you there, bud." You got a little shortcut to some of these answers.
I can answer it with a little bit stronger response this time, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, yeah, so I think we got about 20 people, so I think we got all of our response. So first of all, I'm glad I got it, so many agreement on Agile, because I'm glad I got that right, because that's probably, of the three of these, it's the one I know the least about. This is a great little primer and opener for conversation. So design thinking is a discipline. It's been around for about a decade, and it is all about figuring out what a customer wants and needs. And if I was going to add an even more nuanced, a more nuanced language there, it's about figuring out also what customers are willing and unwilling to do. That's really, really important, particularly when we talk about how we connect it to Agile. Lean Startup is a methodology for doing experimentation. And it's all about seeing how well a customer problem and a product fit together. So we do experiments looking for what we call PMF, product market fit. And we are looking for the tightest product market fit we can find, because the theory is the tighter the product market fit. So the tighter the coupling between a customer problem and a product fit, or a product's value proposition, the more likely it is for a customer to integrate it into their daily or their routines, daily routines, weekly, monthly, whatever the interval of the problem is. And I think you guys, it sounds like all pretty much agree with me that Agile is all about delivering incremental value. So you can already kind of see how these three things start to fit into a narrative, right? If design thinking figures out what the customer wants and needs and is willing to do and really kind of digs into the customer problems. And then lean startup gives us a construct to explore the customer problem and figure out what features or value propositions or products meet that customer problem. And then and then Agile comes in and begins to deliver as we discover where that product market fit is. So as lean startup uses experimentation to kind of investigate and figure out the coupling of that fit, Agile can obviously incrementally deliver what we discover as we move forward, and also becomes a great execution forum or format to do our experiments in, because sprinting particularly works really, really well with trying something out to see if it works, getting some feedback, and then iterating again. Okay, why don't we go to our next question here? All right, detailed requirements and very clear outcomes are critical to starting each of our three disciplines. Weigh in on how well you think how important you think those things are. Right. 16, I think we have 20 altogether, so rounding up here. All right, team respondents, I think we've got 19 altogether. So this one's, there's more of an answer than a conversation starter. The most important thing to know about the quote unquote like right answers here is that there is kind of a stack, right? So in design thinking, in fact, it's a deficit to have requirements and clear outcomes, because design thinking is all about creating requirements and clear outcomes. Lean startup can handle having requirements and outcomes a little bit better than design thinking can. And of course, Agile, we don't want all of the requirements to be worked out for us, but particularly having clear outcomes is pretty important for us to figuring out what we're going to do next. So we could argue about whether it's like 0, 3, and 5, or the idea is that it's at a curve. And that's part of why these things fit together so well, is that we start with design thinking, the thing that really needs 0 requirements and clear outcomes. And you can do lean startup with 0 as well, although like I said, it works a little bit better with a little. But we start with something that requires none, and then we use these different methodologies together to create enough clarity to be able to use the tools in the way that they were designed. So a good methodology that weaves these things all together recognizes that the reason they fit together well is because of the clarity and fidelity they create in our requirements and our outcomes. You'll never leave design thinking with a ton of requirements and super clear outcomes. Lean startup will help you create detailed outcomes, but probably won't have all of your detailed requirements. And Agile obviously figures out and delivers on those requirements and the outcomes incrementally over time. So again, these things, they thread together well for a variety of reasons. But in my mind, one of the biggest ones is the way that they serve problem solving. Design thinking serves problem solving when it's really, really ambiguous and we just don't know what to do next. And lean startup serves problem solving when we kind of know what people want, but we aren't really sure how to get there. And agile becomes very important when now I have an idea of what people want and I generally know that the channel or format or product of how to get there, but now I need to figure out how to go do it. And so these three things on their own, are they all powerful? Absolutely. Together, they create a superpower. Together, they create iconic products. Together, they create the kind of products that we hold up as amazing, right? So together, they create things like Uber and the iPhone and a lot of like, the black swan products that come out there, even if the people designing them didn't know they were formally using design thinking, lean startup, and agile. If you go back and look at what they did or how they got there, you see these really, really clear tiebacks to the types of activities that are in design thinking, lean startup, and then agile. So I kind of propose and I evangelize, and not just at TrackPhone, but just in general, is that, these three disciplines are like the Native American three sisters, the three plants that you plant together because they are symbiotic and they build on each other. And that if they are planted and harvested together, they holistically take care of their environment because they give back as much as they take. These three disciplines are very similar to that. What each discipline has as a weakness, the other discipline has as a strength. And so when we knit them together, we create an almost infallible process that allows us to bring to market products and solutions that we can predict very clearly how customers are going to interact with. And so this is most often used in product management, and you can see how that would be like very exciting in the product management world, because the biggest problem the product management world has, of course, is predicting whether or not, like, if I build it, will they come? And how much money do I invest in it? If I don't know, they'll come. And so these three things come together to really bring some clarity in that space. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit today about how they come together and how they build clarity. So I'm gonna pause there and take comments and questions. What do you think so far? Spark any? I can't monitor the chat, or I haven't been monitoring the chat. Is it sparking any reflections or impressions from anybody?
I think you've got them so deep in thought, Aisha, that they're still processing.
All right, that's cool. I'm inspiring you into silence. Okay, sweet. I like it.
Well,
hey, Aisha, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, can you summarize again? Because that was very powerful. Can you summarize again design thinking, lean startup, and agile?
Wonderful segue into my next slide. Thank you. I'll pay you your $5 after.
Okay. Let me send you my Cash App.
All right. All right. So design thinking, lean. So this is kind of, I'm going to give you guys the heart of how what these three things are and how they fit together. And we'll dig in a little bit. You'll notice I don't have a primer on Agile because I figured you guys would have that one covered. So what you're looking at, this diagram that's here on the right-hand side, is a proper flow of how the three things of how design thinking, lean startup, and Agile kind of fit together. And the way that I have seen them used the best is a little bit more simple than this diagram kind of indicates. Although this diagram does a really good job of indicating that these are like cycles that we move through. It's not quite linear. So design thinking is what I'll jump into first. Design thinking is a process that we use when we are trying to figure out what our customers want, what they need, what they are willing to do, and what they are unwilling to do. In human-centered design, which is design thinking, agile, lean startup, they all are part of this family of design that's human-centered, meaning that we all recognize that the end user is the most important kind of stakeholder in what we're doing. That when we're designing for use is the most important design, right? So in design thinking, what we're really getting at, and you may have seen these little blocks before. These are like the IDEO, who's like the granddaddy of design thinking. This is the way that they draw their process, and it's been adopted by the Stanford D School as a way to teach design thinking. These steps are used to elicit and understand who a user is, what problems they have, and get an idea of what they are looking for out of their solutions, or how they might use a solution, or how they might prioritize the basics of a solution. And you'll notice it's got this little prototype and test here at the end. And this is where lean startup begins to overlap. Design thinking is really great in these first three buckets: empathize, define, and ideate. And they definitely have some repertoire on prototyping and testing, but it's pretty light. So that methodology really kind of focuses on those first three buckets, right? So empathizing is all about understanding who an end user is and using the design thinking tools to really kind of get in their head and spend time with them. Defining is all about reflecting on what you learned in those empathizing activities, which often include like getting out of the building and talking to customers specifically. So reflecting on kind of what you've heard and forming those into problem statements and how might we statements. Then ideation is actually, that's where the how might we comes in. That's really after we take that problem statement, is we noodle on how might we solve it, how might we make it better, how might we minimize it, how might we make it smaller, kind of depending on our problem statement. And the idea here is that we create low fidelity tests of our idea. So we take our how might we's and we bring them to end users after we've kind of fleshed them out at pretty low fidelity, and we get some feedback to make sure that what we heard was right. That how we're defining the problem is mark, and that the solutions we're coming up with, that we're designing, actually meet those needs. So in theory, this is kind of the whole process, everything we're talking about in a nutshell. The deal is that the tools in these spaces really kind of kill in those first three buckets, and they're pretty actually kind of weak in the second two buckets. So when companies just adopt design thinking and Agile, a la TrackPhone, that's where we are right now. They've adopted design thinking, they've adopted Agile, and probably Chuck and Andreas could weigh in here. There's like this space in the middle that's missing. It's like, so we know what the customer wants now. We're talking to them, we're building empathy, we're doing ethnography. We've hired a bunch of fancy people. They have very fancy titles. They make a ton of money. They go out and they do ethnography and journey maps, and like they really get to know our customers. And then what? And then we have our Agile teams, and they're developing solutions and delivering incremental value. And sometimes that ethnography and that CX works makes its way into the Agile team, but not without someone like Chuck and Andreas really, going and grabbing and pulling into that space. There's not a natural connection between the two. And that's really where the lean startup comes in. So in lean startup, we start off with a hypothesis. We start off in that prototype step inside of design thinking. So we have a hypothesis on how we might solve a problem. And then we use something very, very similar to the scientific process to begin to decompose the assumptions we have in our hypothesis about how we're going to solve a customer problem. And starting with the biggest assumptions, create low fidelity and low expense tests to begin answering questions about those assumptions, whether or not they are right or wrong, or to what degree they are right or wrong, right? So when I say right or wrong, that sometimes makes it sound like it's very binary. It's not. You might say something like, I'll give you, for example, today I was working on a product idea for extreme couponers and extreme food budgeters. And one of our assumptions was that it might be hard to create a product to help people with the planning process in extreme couponing and extreme food budgeting, because the people who do it like their process, like they create routines and patterns to go do this thing. And that routine and pattern is important to what they're doing, and so important that they might not be able to give that up. Now, that could be a yes or no question, but it is probably a to what degree question. That's probably a to what degree assumption. Like, we know we're kind of right because that's feedback we got directly from customers. But the big question is, like, is it so right that a customer won't adopt another pattern? Or are they so comfortable in that pattern that they'll ignore the glaring gaps in that pattern or that routine that we think we can solve, right? So these are not often yes or no. Like I said, these are often to what degree. And we are trying very hard on the stack of assumptions to build really quick, inexpensive tests or interactions that let us develop solutions for customers. So if in my design thinking sprint, I got to know that extreme couponer and got to know that, for example, they have this pattern and ritual. They might sit down every Saturday with their newspaper and their Iobata apps and their local flyers and get all their coupons together and plan their routes, because they tend to go to multiple stores and they do different routes. And that ritual, they're very proud of it and they show it off and they talk about it a lot. That's all the stuff you learn in the design thinking cycle, right? That's the research you do when you're getting to know a problem really well. And out of that, I might even say, hey, anything that can let them show off a little bit to other, proudly frugal folks is probably a benefit, or anything that can bolster their routine is probably a benefit, or anything. That's the kind of stuff that you'd get out of design thinking. And you might even get an idea too of how to do it. Now you need Lean Startup to take over and say, okay, so I have this idea. Coupons are great, but you don't often get them for meat, produce, and dairy. That's a gap. That's a problem. Hey, extreme couponers, what do you do to buy meat, dairy, and produce? You do XYZ? Oh, I think I can help you do that. I think I can marry that with your couponing and give you a little app that, for example, will go and there's an app that does this, so it might sound familiar. It's called, I think, Iobata. It'll go to the local stores and find, hey, what are the grocery deals in your neighborhood? And with what you're trying to buy against your coupons, you should make 3 trips. You should go to Aldi, you should go to, Trader Joe's, and you should go to Publix. And here are your 3 local ones. And we know the traffic in those stores. So we're recommending you go to Aldi first, Trader Joe's second, and Publix first or third, right? That's a product idea. And if we just did design thinking and Agile, it would go, here's the idea, now go do it, Agile teams. Well, there's like this gulf in the middle, which is any of that crap right? Is any of it right? Do we have any of that right? Would you be willing, Mr. Customer, if I gave you this value proposition, would you be willing to interact with it? And is it really helpful? And did I understand the nature of the problem correctly? Or do I understand the nature of how you approach the problem correctly? And if I give you a tool to use, will you use it? And how will you use it? And what do you think about it? So what Lean Startup does is it gives us a set of tools to build really low fidelity tests and prototypes to go answer those questions. So that by the time somebody like an Agile team gets this idea, they've got a little bit more than, here is the problem, here's what I think we could do about it, now go do it. They've got some data and some basis and some information about what customers are willing and not willing to do. What value proposition do we need to deliver? What does the solution need to really look and feel like? Meaning, does it need to be luxurious? Does it need to be hip? Does it need to be easy? Does it need to be an app, or should it really be, should it really be a web-based platform? Because most of this planning happens at these people's kitchen table with their computer, right? All of these nuances on how people might use things that maybe will get caught by a UX team or a UX resource in a normal Agile environment at the end of the development cycle or the ends of a sprint. We're now going to push forward. And really quickly and really cheaply try to answer all of those questions, so that as we move into development, as we move into actually creating solutions, we have some founded answers to work from. We've got some user data to work from, and we've also got some users who have been with us for this journey. They've seen paper prototypes. They've seen low fidelity interactions. They've seen Wizard of Oz apps, right? Those are things like a pop app where there's app function, but none of it's real in the background. And all of that information can be handed off to a development team, not with all the answers. That's not what it does, but with just way more answers than if we just were to take that design thinking cycle and slap it into an Agile team, right? It kind of fills it crosses the chasm. In fact, there's a book called exactly that, Crossing the Chasm, that talks about this. And it lets us kind of bring to life this big picture you're seeing on the right-hand side, right? Where, like I said, we use design thinking to understand need, research and observe, prioritize, brainstorm concepts, and then lean UX comes in and turns those concepts, or lean startup comes in and takes those concepts and turns them into hypothesis with experiments and low fidelity prototypes. And by the time we get to, I think I know what my MVP is, then we can start handing off to an Agile team who gets a validated MVP to go build with customers who have been, or users who have been along for the journey. So they kind of inherit not just the research and the experiments, but they inherit the user relationships. And they get user pools who are now like, hey, they are plugged in. We don't even have to prep and prime them. You can get your feedback right away before we, let's say, deliver to a larger stage. So you go into the Agile cycle with an MVP that feels not so much like a struggle. A lot of times when I'm talking to my Agile folks, Andreas and Chuck, we've had these conversations many times, like, help us figure out what the MVP is. Help us figure out what's the minimally valuable or viable product. Viable means we can get it to function. Valuable means it has enough function to bring our user to it, right? Because if we deploy an MVP that functions but doesn't have the table stakes value a user needs, you aren't going to get the interaction you need to bring it to a next level of fidelity. So the lean startup helps you to really clearly understand both, what is the minimal technical thing that needs to be delivered, and then what is the minimal table stakes a user needs for them to make the change to use your thing so that you can have the interactions you require to iterate going forward. So when you knit these things all together, you create, like, a lot of companies, including TrackPhone, this is new, but they use this whole cycle as their new product development life cycle. So this is how they develop products. And whether they hand them off to formal Agile teams or what I'd call like a pseudo Agile team, we call them at TrackPhone growth engines. It's the idea that, probably the most important idea for my Agile practitioners is that you get it, the definition of an MVP really clearly handed off to you. And sometimes the prototype's like even built, right? So in my world, I often don't get to coded prototypes. If I need code, I need my Agile teams. But you will get, wireframes. You will get paper prototypes. You'll get pop prototypes. You'll get, really keen insights or videos or observations about how people use things in the real world, so that it's not just kind of like this esoteric informational handoff, but some actual meaty handoff of who your customers are and what they need. Okay, that was like a whole lot of talking. So I'm going to pause right there. Give me your thoughts, your reflections, your questions. What do you think of the concept in general?
I think this is a first, Rick.
I got a question.
Everybody is quiet.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Go for it.
All right. So I did a design thinking session when I was at a company called Harris, and we did the whole, if you look at the first three things there, we empathize, define, and ideate. So we did that, but also we brought in our UX team to do some prototypes. And so we put on the board, like how the app was going to look, and all through, just paper, folding things over, real simple things. So are you saying, like, when you do the lean startup, are you kind of interjecting that into after you ideate, or would you do some prototyping first and then say, okay, we got a good idea of what what the customer's looking for, and we can bring that into a lean startup and start building a hypothesis and then kind of evolve it a little bit more? I'm just trying to figure out where those two pieces align and if there's some overlap within the different steps when you're empathizing versus when you're, looking at some of these other things within lean startup.
Yeah, there's definitely overlap. So these three things weren't designed to fit together. It's just now that we've got these three things, we can see they fit together. So the way I describe it is, if you're familiar with the design thinking space, this is like a really lean startup is like a really robust, pooled out version of prototype and test. So and I would say the big difference between what lean startup is proposing you're doing in that prototype and test and what design thinking has you doing in that prototype and test is that in design thinking, usually you're in the ideate phase, you come up with your how might we statements, which is how might we go solve this. And you kind of get right into, okay, so I think we're doing an app and I'm going to drop what I think the app looks like and all of that jazz. When you workshop it for like a week long, it feels like it has a natural end. But where you're using it kind of like natively out in the wilds, what you'll find is that you'll bring people your ideas and you might get a little bit of feedback, but you start to lose engagement and eventually you start to hit a wall. And it's because there was assumptions inside of that idea that didn't get decomposed enough to really get the right type of feedback for you to figure out how material those assumptions were to success. So what Lean Startup does is it gives us a really rigorous way to break down those assumptions and begin testing them. And oftentimes it is not by bringing a version of the product to a customer. Oftentimes those basic assumptions, like in the example I was just giving you on the extreme couponer, it'll be in things like, my basic assumption was that you don't have coupons for meat, dairy, and produce, that you are interested in alternative strategies for purchasing those things, and that you probably have a strategy already for doing those. Now, for my idea on an app to do this to work, those three things have to be true. So a lot of times what we'll do in Lean Startup is we don't start with prototyping at all. We start with figuring out, how do I know if those three things are true? And like your first bias is going to be, well, go ask a customer. And that's a good start. But what people say and what people do are two very different things. And the best example I have of that is Weight Watchers. Weight Watchers, I don't know if you guys have used it before or know how it works, but in Weight Watchers, you record what you eat. And what you record gives you points. And those points, you have a bank of points every day. And that's how you keep yourself with, under your caloric measures, but also, hitting your protein goals and your fiber goals. And like, there's an elaborate formula to go into using those points. And they've got a really cool app that makes it super easy to record things. And nobody sees what you record as an end user but you. And so you would think that Weight Watchers could go in and grab those logs from people, kind of like on a metadata point of view, and figure out, like, does their system work or not? And the answer is they can't, because people lie, even to themselves. They record what they aspirationally want to eat, not what they actually want to eat. So in design thinking, there is this bias towards speaking to humans. And at the beginning of the process, that's really important. In Lean Startup, there's a bias towards watching humans. And that's kind of like the next step. And it's what lets us know the difference between the aspirational and the actual. Now, the deal is the aspirational isn't invalid because it isn't true. In fact, it's a really important piece of evidence. It's telling us what people want. The observation lets us know what they're doing so that our product ideas almost always fill the delta between those two things, the delta between how you want to be or how you want to act or how you want to appear or how you want to interact and how you actually do all of those things. So this is a whole methodology around using observations or harvesting observations to tighten up your product ideas so that it can accommodate for both aspirational and actual. I would say design thinking almost wholly lives in the land of aspirational. Lean Startup almost wholly lives in the land of actual. And those, so one is all about talking to people and getting their thoughts and opinions and motivations and feelings and desires and all of that stuff. And Lean Startup is about taking that and then seeing the delta between how do they actually live, do, interact, and then building kind of the bridge between those two things. That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot more sense. And yeah, you've encouraged me a lot more to look at that. Yeah, awesome. Oh, here's another question. Like, how often should you be, like starting this process? Like you've handed off to the Agile teams, they're iterating. At what point do you come back and say, okay, let's redo this. Let's make sure that we're fresh and we're up to, still doing Lean Startup or getting that different things for each build.
Yeah.
Or
I'm like, so I'm an evangelist of lean startup and design thinking. So I tend to think you should use it all the time. Like, I'm like, anytime you're designing anything big, come talk to me. This is what I
So
tell
like a
Andreas.
major
And
feature comes out, that's a good time to
yeah,
restart
like
it.
Andreas, you weigh in here. Andreas is in at TrackPhone. He's like the coach for our Agile team. So, and he's just now, we're starting to use these three things all together. So and Andreas, you'd probably be a better answer for this. Like, what do you see as the big triggers as to why you might want to go back and engage in this process?
So one of the things that, and I'm new to this, I'll start off by prefacing it that way. But one of the things that I think one of the biggest values this brings, because we have a team that I'm helping out with, I'm coaching, which is like a lean UX team. So how do you know that the feature that they're being proposed by the team will actually be consumed? Right. And so what I like about this is that you run these experiments to see whether a proposed feature, actually before you build it, if it would actually be, if the customer will actually interact with that feature or not. Right. So we use, in this particular team, Lean UX to validate that, others learn from that before a feature is even proposed. So kind of what I see is, and Aisha, correct me if I'm wrong, but I see kind of lean startup more for validating new products,
Yep.
right? And I see the lean UX kind of maybe a better fit for validating proposed features. So if I have a feature that I'm proposing, right, and before we build it, let's test it out to see if it's actually going to realize the outcomes that we expect. Does that make sense? So that's where I see kind of the lean UX being that big value add. And so what that does is it's a lot cheaper to go that route than to actually build it and then pray for the best.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So that's so when I internalize all this, that's the way I kind of see it. So it really so it's a lot cheaper to do it that way than to give it to an Agile team and then have them build it and then hope for the best that you're going to get the ROI. I mean, we've done projects thinking that it's going to give us the ROI that it's going to give us, and it doesn't happen because it wasn't tested. It wasn't validated with our customers. And so I think that's kind of what I see as the biggest value to this. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I think it's just a little bit more, just like, it's like you said, experimenting, right? If you're doing things, is seeing that it's working. If not, maybe you want to come back and relook at some of those, how do you validate your hypothesis? Is that measured some way?
Yes.
Those kind of things, and then go back and see where you're at and what you need to do to adjust, inspect and adapt, right?
That's right. And then so that's where you kind of declare your assumptions. And when you declare the assumptions, one of the first things you ask is, what is it that you got to learn from this? What is it that you got to learn from this to validate whether my hypothesis is true or not? Or what else can I learn from this along the way before we actually go out and build this thing?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that's kind of the idea. And so we experiment and we define what our expected outcomes are, right? And then if it looks like it's tracking that way, yeah, then we probably have a viable option here that we could go build and have our customers, consume it and get the expected outcomes that we're hoping for out of it. Aisha, how did I do, Aisha?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. I'm a little off $5 out of this. I'd say anytime you had features or new features where the interaction of the customer or the user is really important and unknown. So it's super important for them to interact with it a certain way, and you're not really sure how they're going to interact. These tools are very handy. because they can be scaled up and down pretty quickly, right? Like we can do the full on big on version you're seeing that we're coming, that you got here. Or, Andreas and I have now strung up a few week-long sprints where we combine a bunch of these tools all together. And in a week, we work through,
Right.
okay, I have a feature, an end user needs to use it. I'm not 100% sure what they want, or maybe I don't 100% understand the problem, or I know they're going to have to interact with this super, super heavily, and I don't know what to predict. And we can use these tools to kind of answer the user questions specifically. Think of feature design about the kinds of things that UX people tell you, and they, I'm sure you guys have had this where the UX person will come back and basically say, I appreciate that you've built all this, but guys, garbage, trash. The user isn't doing anything that you think they're going to do. The idea is like we start having those questions before we build versus after we've gotten to some level of fidelity that we can go use the traditional UX tools. It's like these are a set of tools that you can use before you've built anything to answer some of those questions so that you build the right thing. And it doesn't have to all be like the big shamboozle. We can like pare it down to grabbing, tools or tactics throughout either of these three processes to answer those questions. So a lot of times Andreas and I will have conversations that sound a lot like, I got X amount of time. I got a sponsor who's like kind of in, but not super in. But we've got something we know is sticky or complicated or really people-based. And so what can we bring to the table to help this team? And it might be an amalgamation of these tools, not the whole entire process that we kind of move forward with.
Right.
Wow, cool. We got a hand up from Regina.
Yeah.
Regina, go.
Yeah, no, I think Joel asked all my questions, and you guys answered
Sorry.
the other ones. No,
okay.
this is really good. The question was, when is this best recommended, right? And what's the different scenarios? You answered that. I mean, coming from the Agile perspective, right? One of our goals has always been to minimize the upfront work, right? Let's get to it as soon as possible. I understand what you guys are saying. That are we working on the right things, and how can we confirm that, right? And have that conversation up front, and that these tools help us. And then you led to, well, you can also make this upfront work shorter, that you don't have to do the whole big shebang, that you can also kind of scale this to, hey, do some of this so that perhaps, the product managers or the product owners could get excited about doing this more often. Now,
Yep.
I do have a question, and I know we're still looking into this. Based on the studies that you guys have done, is it recommended that this work be done outside of the Agile teams, or can some of this be done inside of the Agile teams?
I love when it happens inside of the Agile teams. In our case at TrackPhone, we're operating outside of the Agile teams because the Agile teams aren't necessarily involved in new product development. But if you're in a scenario where the Agile teams are involved in new product development, like in product inception, then absolutely inside of the Agile teams, because the more we can take people along for the journey with like speaking to customers and interacting with customers and getting customer feedback, the better you can build things because you know who you're building them for, right? So it is, and any little bit that we can tether back is, I think, pretty important. So these can be super, super quick and dirty and easy, right? Like we don't need the whole, a great, for example, is age-old question. If I build it, will they come? We don't have to build it to figure it out. Like not at all. I can set up, I fake advertise it on Facebook. I don't use my branding. I use a fake branding. I go on Facebook. I go to my product managers and say, dude, I give you a magic wand. Describe the features any way you want and the way you think is going to, like, what do you imagine? How do you imagine the customer interacting? And they'll throw out 3 or 4 value propositions. Right now, we're in the middle of testing some wallet value propositions. So my product manager has, 4 or 5 cool things that they think is going to make our digital wallet bomb, right? And so under a fake brand Cash Atlas on a fake Facebook page, we have those 5 value propositions, and we've literally set them out like people can buy them. And when you go to interact or download or buy it, you put in your zip code or your email address, or zip code usually, and it says, I'm sorry, this isn't available in your area yet, but if you leave me your email address, I'll let you know when it is. And what we find out very quick and dirty, like literally 2 or 3 days, is the whole direction we're moving in, does it make sense? Will people respond to it? Minus a big marketing campaign, minus, all of the things we think we need to sell something. Because if we have good product market fit, those products sell themselves. That's why we're so interested in getting them, right? Is that if you find something that solves a big, huge problem in an awesome and elegant way, you actually don't need to advertise it that much. The users will do it for you. And so there are all of these little tricks and hacks we have in the lean startup space to answer questions before we start. And they're not absolutes. I cannot guarantee you that because if I market or if I test a product that way, that if 80,000 people sign up on Facebook in a couple of days, that 80,000 people will buy the product. But I can tell you that if I put it on Facebook for 3 days and 4 people buy the product, that 80,000 people are not going to buy the product. I can't tell you that, right? So it is really all about, I'm going to skip forward in slides because I think it ties to a point really specifically. So I've got great animation here, lovely, but this is kind of what I want to talk about. When you string these 3 things together, what happens is as we use them, risk declines over time, right? Our risk goes down and down and down and down because we get clearer and clearer data around what a customer will or won't do. But our time and our money and our effort goes up. And it's that confluence, it's that cross that makes this such a valuable process. Because in the world we have today, if we're not using these processes, we are spending all of the money and not managing any of the risk, which is where we get to developing products that are duds, right? So if we use these things strung together, even casually, honestly, it doesn't have to be like super fancy. If we even casually have an agile team do a design thinking sprint and then a lean startup sprint or a lean sprint, those 2 weeks will reduce risk considerably without spending that much money, usually just the time of the people involved, right? Before we ever create a single piece of code. And we can answer a lot of questions before we start spending money and spending time developing solutions. So it's this cross that makes it so exciting, for example, to senior leaders, because while I can't tell you if a product will be awesome if it goes through this cycle, I can tell you that I will manage down risk before you spend a lot of money. That I can guarantee. And that factor alone makes it very, very enticing to the people who sponsor things like new product development, because their biggest problem or their biggest failure or the thing they get the most embarrassed about or keeps them up at night is, I just spent $3 million on a product developing it for 2.5 years and I'm marketing the hell out of it and 15 people bought it. And that's, by the way, those are real numbers. That's not an exaggerated example. Those are real numbers at TrackPhone, and they've been real numbers at other places I've worked at as well, where we're talking millions of dollars and years of work for a product we really have no idea if a user will want or need or use in the way we imagine. So the big one, this becomes to me really material to a company's execution strategy when we begin to understand that we really want to correlate reducing the risk and spending. You don't need to spend that much money to reduce the risk. In fact, we do sprints that are under $5,000 and under 5 weeks, right? So and $5,000 is a windfall in lean startup. Like we can do an awful lot with like $1,000 bucks. So it is, I can reduce a lot of risk before we spend money. And that's the really valuable part of the process is now, do you invest a little time in doing that? Yep, you do. But not nearly as much time and effort as you would invest if you didn't do it at all. If that makes sense.
Wow, thank you for that, Aisha. We got a question from Dana. Can we talk in terms of output for a moment? What are the outputs of design thinking? Is it really a product to put in the hands of the customer or client?
No. Design thinking will never you'll never leave design thinking with a cooked product. You'll leave design thinking with a product idea. And that becomes the hypothesis in lean startup. And out of a lean startup cycle, you'll come in with a product idea and you'll leave with an MVP. Now, a minimally valuable product, not the same as a minimally viable. I still need, this little overlap that you see here with the dotted line of lean startup and the solid line of agile, because what I can get out of lean is I begin to understand, okay, what are my customers' table stakes? What are the minimum things I need to deliver for the customer to engage or to break away from however they're solving the problem today? What are the minimum interaction criteria that I have? What are the basics of what the experience should look and feel like to make this all happen? What value props do I need to deliver to get a customer to engage? Will really require our agile teams to build things like codable prototypes. And when we put these two things together, right? Like when we have a lean startup team either become an agile team or a lean startup team work with an agile team, at some point we get to the point where we say, all right, I'm ready to go like make something. I'm ready to go build something and give it to customers and see what happens. And we'll still use the lean startup methodologies for checking in on it and making sure it's going in the direction we want it to go and we're understanding the data we're seeing, but we'll use the agile teams to incrementally deliver those prototypes to really begin to understand what we call this, usually in my world, this is a beta product. So this is a product I am offering that is coded, but I'm not making revenue on it yet. And the whole reason I'm offering it is to make it better, is to really like study it and see how it works in the wild and tighten it up before I try to scale it or sell it or collect money for it. If anyone tells you they got a fully baked product out of design thinking, they were probably started with design thinking and were probably using lean startup and didn't realize it. A lot of consultancies squish these two together and call them design thinking just to keep it easy.
Yeah. And then you said MVP is not minimum viable product, it's something else. And then my second question to piggyback off of this is, could this trio be applied to if you already have a product, but you're designing a capability or a feature? So another way, and you follow what I'm saying, you're shaking your head.
Yep.
So I'll
listen. Absolutely. Yeah. So in my world, I talk about minimally valuable products because I am mostly a design thinking and lean startup practitioner. I work with agile teams all the time and I have my certs, but I've never been a scrum master. So I don't live and breathe your world. And so what I usually hand off is a pretty lewd prototype, often a paper prototype, that I know are the minimal things you're going to need to give the customer for the customer to come to your product or experience, which is a little bit different from how we traditionally define an MVP, a minimally viable product, which is what is the minimum thing I need to deliver to get this to work, right? So somewhere between those two things, what are our end users' table stakes? And like, it's got to do at least this for me to even be interested. And what is the minimal thing we can deliver to get it to function? Those two things come together to create beta products. So things I'm going to deliver, like I said, that I might not necessarily collect revenue on. Occasionally we collect revenue on them. But the reason we're deploying them is to make them good enough to bring to a mass market. That's kind of this overlap between lean startup and agile. And I believe you can do that for features. I believe that's at a perfectly appropriate design cycle for a feature as well, right? So in a feature set or a new capability, it might look something. I'll give you, for example, Acorns is a savings app. And they just recently moved into the mobile wallet space. And I am part of their beta club. Lots of apps have beta clubs to particularly manage this little delta space where I'm not going to charge you for the product and I want to watch what you do. So maybe you don't have as much privacy as you normally would with the product, but I'm going to give you all of the cool stuff first. I'm also part of Amazon has a beta program that you should sign up for if you haven't, because it's super fun. And the whole point of that is sometimes in Acorns, that's a product on the ground. I have that app on my phone. I use it. They recently began to wonder if they could, how might they give users access to the funds they're collecting in a way that is benefit for both people. And so they've come up with a debit card to use into the Acorn space. That they released that debit card way back when they did not know how it was going to work, really. and they did it by creating a prototype that was kind of a behind the scenes prototype. So it didn't really function. They said, hey, beta user, we have this new card. We want to test it out. We're going to connect it to a card you already have, a debit card you already have in your bank. And then we're going to ask you to use it. Now, I was a beta user, so I knew I was going to be doing something non-traditional to get this to happen, kind of like a tester. And the test they were doing was the actual execution was carried out by my debit card at Wells Fargo, but the user experience is being managed by Acorns and their new debit card. And what they got out of it is understanding what my buying habits are, how much I might potentially spend, where I was going to tender the card, whether or not their tendering experience, like their back-end clearing experience, worked. But at the end of the day, it was kind of like a fakie. It was kind of fake. It was just my normal debit card, and in the experience that was being managed by them. That was not to design a whole new product. That was a whole thing to check out a feature that they were thinking about, and I believe they have added to their lineup, right? So they were using these principles in the middle of developing a product that was well on its way in a product community that was so mature, they have a beta program, right? So it's you can definitely use this in product communities that you have a product well underway, and now you're working on making that product better. It's probably a little heavy-handed for incremental products, like, oh, I want to make my cart checkout easier, more refined. This is probably a little heavy-handed for that. A traditional UX team would probably do a better at that. But maybe you want to add like a whole new capability to your product or your app or your website, or your service. That's where we might start backing up a little bit and thinking about the design thinking and the lean startup tools. Particularly if it's not stuff you've ever done before, like through your new capability, you're going into a whole new domain.
Wow. Ciao, you got a question for Aisha?
Yes. Hi, Aisha. I have a question. At which stage should I involve the customers the most when I design an internal product? Which means like I know there are just 100 people within the system, and I pretty much know all of them if I want to talk to each and every one of them. In this situation, I pretty much have a general idea about their problem because I talk to them and they complain. And I have a general idea about how this picture should look like. But if in this situation, when I apply the design thinking, like, should I try to interview them as deeply as possible before I apply the design thinking, and then use your lean UX design to see them? Or I should try to not be influenced by too many people's opinion too much when initially do the design thinking, but just with the team. So if I have full access to just a limited, user, and then they all use the system and I can do whatever I want, what is the best way in this situation to just design an internal system?
Yeah. Great question. So this is somewhat the secret to the Gmail product. The Gmail product actually doesn't have, well, they used to not have that big of a beta community because they insisted their designers use their products. So their designers were their users. And that meant the designers had a deep sense of empathy for what an end user wanted. And when they first deployed Gmail, they just deployed it in a small group in their company, the 300 people. And so when your user community is not very large, I'd consider 100 to 300 people, not that big, or very monocultured, meaning they all do the same job. Maybe they're all the same gender. Maybe they're all the same race, the same age. They are similar. Their perspective because of their demography or their job or their function is very much the same. I think you can borrow from these camps. You can borrow tools from these camps, right? But you can be really creative and flexible in how you interact with folks, and you don't need to be so heavy-handed as to go through the whole process. So for example, in cases like yours, I've seen people create beta clubs. A great, for example, one at Cisco was called the Fast Failure Society. And so of that small user community, maybe 20 people sign up, and their whole existence, as they interact with you is for you to be able to bring them like basically down and dirty ideas to interact with and start to get feedback from. So there aren't deep interviews into like, hey, what's the worst problem and how do you feel about your day? But there are people who have signed up to give you feedback, and they know the thing they're getting is going to be kind of messy and won't have all the answers worked out yet, and maybe won't function very well, or maybe won't function at all yet. And they're kind of signing up because they want to be part of directing where it goes, right? And those types of groups, particularly when they're small like that, just a group of 5 or 6 people, if we're talking 100 users, probably represents the whole group. You can make a big dent with just 5 or 6 people. Because design thinking and lean startup doesn't really work on statistics. You know, most of the things that we're testing here have so many, if we're getting into like kind of the monkey of statistics, is the experiments are so complex and have so many independent factors that if we were using statistical design of experiments, our sample sets would have to be giant because our experiments are so complex. So this isn't necessarily about statistical rigor. This is about inviting your end users into your design process in a way that helps you get the big misses out of the way before you start. And in a 100-person community, dude, that could be like 3 or 4 people. That could be like just a really small group of people for you to bounce ideas off of, for you to talk through solutions through, for you to talk through like prioritization of feature sets or prioritization of problems with. You could engage a community of 100 pretty easily, but you would only need a pretty small set, particularly if you are also a user of this thing where you have a pretty good empathetic mindset to begin with, or you like, you know, you've been serving this user community of 100 people for 5 years. You probably know them and what they need pretty well. You know what I mean? Like, so this is all about not getting to know them, but getting their feedback actively before you start coding. That makes sense?
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
So Chow, we can practice some of this on Saturday with our Tesla build.
There you
Yeah,
go.
definitely.
You know, this is where we're at, where we just did some personas. And so now we can take it and
Yeah,
do a
absolutely.
design thinking session.
With the time remaining, is there
Yeah.
there is I think there was, I don't know if you have any additional slides that you want to show us, Aisha, before. I think there was one more question that they want to know, when are you going to finally write a book? I think I saw that.
I'll get on that.
Okay.
Well, there's Michael's answer.
Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm working on it. But if you want to
Yeah.
do some reading now, before you wait for my book, these are my recommendations. In fact, Sprint is one of my real big go-tos, particularly for Agile teams, because that is a week-long facilitated process broken down in a book with awesome tools online that any Agile team can use to use this process. And they're literally going to walk you through step by step. It's how Google Ventures does it. The startup way that's all about lean startup. You'll notice I don't have the actual lean startup book on because it's pretty philosophical. I don't find it super helpful. The startup way is him taking lean startup principles and applying it to like corporate America and like enterprise. Although if you are a startup, the lean startup is a great book. And then lean UX is this whole premise that I'm giving you, how you take all of these principles and kind of weave them together into product design. And the same with the Invincible company, different writers, and they tend to be a little bit more tool based than lean UX does, but also a series of, another consultancy's version of how you go from design thinking into the Agile space. And all 4 of these are like rock solid. I can literally pull them off my shelves behind me. I use them all the time, and strongly kind of recommend them. And by the way, when I hire new people, these are the 4 books I make them go buy, or I go buy for them, depending on the scenario we're in.
Love it, love it. So I want a big favor from the group now. Okay, I want to make sure we give our shout out to Aisha. So I need you guys to turn on your cameras. Turn on your cameras. Let's go, cameras. Let's go, get them on. Mike, what do you think? How's it? There you go, Andres. All right, Regina, looking good, Regina. Fix that hair. You got it, Regina? Yes. Omar, good job. Okay, so remember, it's a gesture. We want to provide a gesture to Aisha. How much did you enjoy today's session? So you guys can put whatever you want, and we're gonna have Neilu is going to give us a quick snapshot of us. Okay, is everybody looking good? Good job, good job. All right, Neilu, count us down and let's make sure we give her a lot of what? Go ahead, Neilu.
Okay, so 3, 2, 1, go.
Woo!
There we go. Thank you.
All right. So
Awesome, guys.
again, amazing job. Thank you very much, Aisha, for joining us. This is the crew. So I don't know if they gave you notice, but you can't actually leave. So now you're
No,
stuck with us.
I'm stuck here now.
No, you're
Okay.
stuck. You're stuck. That's
I'm
it.
in.
You're done.
I'm
This is
in.
the event you want to participate in, as in every Wednesday, you know, just even if you can't make it, we got video for you. Okay. You can take
Okay, cool.
We've
Cool.
got a ton of different events that we've had so far. And then our Saturday event is also, you know, amazing. Especially, I think Joe just mentioned some of the stuff that he's going to be taking out of this session to use on that Saturday. I think we're not going to be this Saturday, guys. Is it this Saturday?
Oh, yeah. We got Saturday off this.
July. We're going to actually skip a Saturday. How depressing is that?
I've got a date with a whale shark this Saturday, so
Oh.
I'm busy. I'm busy this Saturday, but I'll send
Nice.
pictures because either I'm gonna get eaten or my Instagram's gonna be lit. One or the other.
So where do you, so I'm a diver too, and I ride motorcycles, so I'm interested. Where are you going?
Right. I'm going to Playa del Carmen, because this is their mating season. So this is when the whale sharks are randy and they get together in groups because apparently they're kind of lone on their own. And then we're taking a little boat off the coast to a spot some dude knows. And like I said, either it's going to be amazing or I'm going to get eaten. I'm going to figure it out.
Yeah, whale sharks don't eat people, so just,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
perfect.
I'm not worried about the whale sharks. I'm worried about the tiger sharks who tend to
Oh.
follow them when they're in the mating season. That's the part they don't want to tell you online. They're like, whale sharks are great. And I'm like, they are great. So aren't the manta rays that are following the food source. The tiger sharks get me a little bit like, but that's all right. I'm just going to like suck in my fear and do it anyhow.
Good for you.
So
Awesome.
if you notice the chat, we just put the link there to LinkedIn. Please make sure you like it, share it. Again, give some great comment to Aisha and her great job that she did today. I just want to add a couple more things to the presentation. I loved it. I think that was great. Think about this in your organization. I know not everyone has that opportunity, but that they're able to work this out and experiment. You notice how Andres and Aisha mentioned that they're still trying to figure it out, that they're working through it. That's pretty impressive. So I think the question that I would ask for you, Aisha, is more like, what did it take for leadership to actually buy in on this? Like, what did you do? Hypnosis? What did you actually do to try to get them to agree?
It's been a journey. Perhaps hypnosis. So really, kudos to Rick and Regina and Andreas, because the success they had in the Agile journey at TrackPhone is kind of like what gave IT the street cred to even begin to have a conversation. I work through in IT and we're working with the product management folks. So it's really the foundational work that you guys did in bringing value through bringing Agile that would let the company listen when we said, hey, we have something else. We have another thing that you might want to use that kind of fits into this world together that can add even more value. So in my case, I stole your credibility, piggybacked right on top of it, and made the offer for Lean Startup. In organizations where maybe you don't have your Agile stuff, as solid as they did at TrackPhone, I don't think you're necessarily, you can still be an advocate, but it is certainly easier if you have one of these practice standing. So if you've got a design thinking practice standing, it's cool. So you can bring Lean Startup, or if you've got Lean Startup, you can add Agile or design thinking, right? It's like through the credibility that any one of these practices bring, you can kind of use it to pull forward these other practices.
Now I can tell you, you walk the walk, right? So I've seen many sessions.
Oh, I'm a badass. I mean, yes, be a badass.
Sure.
And everyone knows.
No humility. No humility, but okay.
No one will argue otherwise.
And people,
everyone who knows me knows I don't like having an ounce of humility, dude.
And people
not
call
even a
me
little.
pushy. People call me pushy. Hey.
Oh my
But I
God.
don't think my giant ego was instrumental at
I'm
all.
a
That's one of those
pussycat.
things I get over to get things done. But yeah, no, it's really, and truly, like, now, not joking. It's the good transformation work that Rick, Regina, and Andreas did that made the group trust us enough to go try something that was going to make them really uncomfortable. And at TrackPhone, they guard their customers like it's nobody's business, right? Like, they don't want people talking to their customers. So to get the group to a place where they'd be willing for us to say, not only am I going to talk to your customers, I'm going to bring them ugly babies. I'm going to bring them ugly products that aren't done yet, that are kind of screwed up, that are, like, to get them to a place where they were okay with doing that. That was 100% built on the credibility that the Agile implementation that we got, implementing Agile across the organization, for sure. There's no way we could have started with Lean Startup. Like, there's no way. We had to have had that Agile journey happen for this to even be possible.
Wow. Woo! That's to end it. So Aisha, how do you want to end this? What's the last word you want to give of the day? Did everybody like it? Did everybody go out there on the web? Make sure you like and share the post.
They actually absolutely did, Rick. We have people
Okay.
liking it and commenting. So thank you.
All right. Aisha, how do you want to end this session today? Give us final words.
Final words of the day, dude. That's so much pressure. I didn't think of final words. Words of the day. God damn it. Now I'm just going to drop the ball. How about
Go
this?
forth.
How about this?
Go forth and conquer.
Yeah. Be brave. If this is all about risk. If you don't
Fair.
take some risks, you can't get, if you don't ask for it, you can't get it. So that's my recommendation, is to be bold, because if you're not going to be bold, just go home.
Whoa.
Go big
That's
or
how
go
I feel.
home.
That's my personal philosophy in life is go big or go home. That's a real thing. So I definitely, in this case, is be bold, ask. The worst that's gonna happen, people are say no. That's not the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
If you can be a badass, be a badass. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.